Today, we are going to dive into one of the most profound and impactful mysteries in all of biblical history, the covenant with Abraham. This promise from God was not just a word, it was a pact that still echoes today. Abraham had no idea what was coming when he looked up at the stars that night, but something grand was being revealed, a covenant that would change the history of humanity forever. And what if I told you that there are still many details of this covenant that hold unrevealed secrets? Stay with me until the end of this video, and let's explore each layer of this enigmatic pact together. Welcome to the Read and Praise channel. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment below on what you think makes Abraham's story so special. You won't want to miss a single detail. The context of the covenant and Abraham's calling. Abraham, still known as Abram, lived in the ancient city of Ur, a center of worship for various gods and idols, following polytheistic traditions. Amidst this society, he receives a direct message from God, the Creator, which breaks with everything he knew. God calls him to leave his land, his relatives, and his father's household, to go to a land that he would show him. This calling was an act of radical faith, as Abraham would have to leave everything behind without knowing what awaited him. This decision to depart meant more than a simple geographical change. It was the beginning of a new spiritual relationship. It is in this context of obedience that God declares the first promise. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Genesis 12:2. What makes this extraordinary is that Abraham, childless and married to Sarah, who was barren, received this promise in a context where such an idea seemed impossible. Why would God choose a man without children to be the father of a nation? This mystery is key to understanding Abraham's faith and the greatness of the divine covenant. The test of faith and the first act of obedience. Abraham's life was marked by various tests of faith, but one of the most well-known is God's call to sacrifice his son Isaac, the promised child. After waiting for decades, Abraham and Sarah finally have Isaac, but in a crucial moment, God asks him to offer Isaac as a sacrifice on Mount Moriah. This request seemed to contradict the very promise of the covenant, as God had promised that through Isaac his descendants would be numerous. Abraham obeys and takes Isaac to the mountain, but at the last moment, God intervenes and spares the boy's life, providing a ram for the sacrifice. This event is both a confirmation of the covenant and a revelation of God's love and provision. This test serves to show that Abraham's covenant with God was based on total trust and surrender, and that this relationship required sacrifices and unwavering faith. For many scholars, this episode foreshadows the sacrifice of Christ, the Son of God, who would later be offered on behalf of all humanity. The ritual of the covenant, a sacred and mysterious moment. To seal the covenant with Abraham, God performs a ritual involving specific animals. In Genesis 15, God asks Abraham to prepare a heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a pigeon, dividing the animals in half and placing the parts opposite each other. This type of covenant ritual was an ancient practice, symbolizing that both parties of the covenant would bear serious consequences if they broke the pact. But while Abraham waits for a final instruction, something surprising happens. A dense and terrifying darkness falls upon him, and he enters a state of deep fear. At that moment, God reveals to Abraham the future of his descendants, including the period of slavery in Egypt and the later liberation. Then a torch and a fire pass between the halves of the animals, indicating God's presence. This action symbolized that God was taking on the responsibilities of the covenant unilaterally, committing to fulfill his promises regardless of human actions. This is one of the most enigmatic aspects of this covenant, because God positions himself as solely responsible for the fulfillment of the pact. The promises, blessings, and challenges for generations. The promise made to Abraham was grand. He would be the father of a great nation, and through him, all the families of the earth would be blessed. However, the covenant included significant challenges. God revealed to Abraham that his descendants would be strangers in a land that was not theirs and would be enslaved for 400 years. Genesis 15:13. This forecast of suffering seemed contradictory to the idea of abundant blessings. But this stage was essential to fulfilling God's plan. When the descendants of Abraham, the Israelites, were freed from Egypt, they left not only with material goods, but also with a strengthened identity as God's people. The crossing of the desert and the receiving of the 10 Commandments were, in themselves, part of the development of this covenant. God's promise went beyond wealth and possessions. It was about forming a people who would live according to his laws, a people who would be a light to the nations. The seed of the promise and the timeline. Abraham's lineage would be the channel through which God would fulfill his covenant. From Isaac would come Jacob, and from Jacob the 12 tribes of Israel. Each of these descendants carried a portion of the promise and the responsibility of keeping this covenant alive. Time passed, and this promise remained alive, guiding the people of Israel through exiles, battles, and restorations. But there is a crucial turning point. This lineage culminates in Jesus Christ, who is considered by Christians to be the ultimate fulfillment of the promise to Abraham. Jesus came to extend the blessing of Abraham's covenant to all nations, becoming the seed by which all the families of the earth would be blessed. This promise becomes eternal and inclusive, embracing all nations, languages, and peoples. The covenant with Abraham, therefore, is seen as a foreshadowing of God's redemptive plan for all humanity. The final mystery, the eternal covenant. The impact of Abraham's covenant is noted throughout the biblical history, from the patriarchs to the prophets, and culminates in the New Testament. Jesus Christ, on various occasions, refers to Abraham as a testimony of the faith and obedience that are required of God's children. In Galatians 3:29, Paul states, "And if you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's seed, and heirs according to the promise." This means that the covenant with Abraham is not limited to a specific lineage, but has been expanded to include all those who believe in Christ. This final mystery reveals the depth of the divine covenant. What began with a single man was expanded to reach the entire world. Today, the covenant with Abraham is the foundation for understanding the relationship between God and humanity. It teaches us that genuine faith requires surrender, obedience, and sacrifice, but also brings eternal rewards that can only be understood in the light of faith. Now, before we say goodbye, let me ask you an important question. Have you ever reflected on how this covenant with Abraham, made thousands of years ago, still impacts our lives today? Perhaps we think that these ancient stories are distant from us, but by understanding every detail of the covenant, it becomes clear that it carries messages for our time as well. Think with me. Have you ever felt called to something that seemed bigger than yourself, as Abraham did when he heard God's call? Sometimes God leads us down paths we don't immediately understand, but it is precisely in these moments of faith and obedience that we find the greatest blessings. What do you think God might be calling you to do today? What promise does he have in store for you, waiting for you to take that first step of faith? The story of Abraham is a living example that even in our limitations, God can do something extraordinary if we trust him. He doesn't require perfection, but sincere faith and a willingness to say yes to what he places in our hearts. How do you see this in your own life? Are you ready to say yes, as Abraham did? Leave a comment on how this journey with Abraham inspired you. I'd really like to hear your opinion and know how these reflections touch your walk of faith. And so, we conclude this deep dive into the covenant of Abraham. If you made it this far, it's a sign that this story touched something in you. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and share with someone who needs to know about this special covenant. I'll leave related videos in the cards and also at the end of this video so you can continue this journey of discovery. Until our next encounter.